can be easy to miss in this story the revolutionary nature of the divine that is found there. And one of the reasons we miss it is because of the great storytelling, whether Linda reading it, but the story of Abram and the 14 chapters that follow this passage are some of the best storytelling you'll find in the Bible. And we can also miss the nature of the divine that's presented because of the focus on the land, which is admittedly something that is still relevant today. But a few things stand out in this passage that show a revolutionary understanding of the divine. And the first one is buried in all this talk about blessing. And I think I've said before, I don't particularly like the word blessing or bless or any of its variants, and I have my reasons for that. But in today's reading, I'm okay with it because of what it means. Yahweh tells Abram not simply that he will be blessed, and not simply that he will be a means of blessing. He says that in Abram, all the peoples of the earth, all the families of the earth will bless themselves. All the families of the earth will bless themselves. And I love that phrase because it means certainly Yahweh is concerned with the blessing going to the other. These are the very people who Abram, he's about to enter their land. So it means the blessing reaches them. But not that they're mere passive recipients of this blessing. They too are agents of blessing. They are capable of creating blessing. They too are living the divine. And this entrance into Canaan that we see in Abram then places it in direct contrast to the conquest. The conquest is that period in Israel's history after they've been in bondage in Egypt. They're in the wilderness, and they come into Canaan. And honestly, it presents one of the most morally horrifying pictures of God that we have in the Bible. Because in it, we're told in the book of Joshua that God says, come in and slaughter those who are in the land. And Joshua does just that. Most notably, he does this at a city of Ai. And he lays an ambush between Ai and Bethel, and the armies come out, and he slaughters the armies, and he kills all the people in both those cities, men and women, young and old. And so the Genesis authors, and they're writing centuries after that event, and then they have aggressive editors who continue to edit this for centuries beyond that. The final picture we get refers to Abram, who is primary to Joshua, who comes before him both in terms of chronology and faith. And what we are hearing is God saying through Abram, go into the land and bless, don't butcher. This is a direct counter to the conquest as understood throughout Israel's history. And just to drive this point home, and when Abram's in the land, he journeys to this very place between Bethel and Ai, and there he builds an altar of peace to Yahweh. So this is the first revolutionary aspect of the divine that's easy to miss in this story. And the second one happens in the means of the blessing, because there's irony in Abram's story. His name means something like the exalted father. Yet when he's introduced, we're told that he has no children, and he's past the age of having children. And this cues us into the fact that there's something going on with the means of blessing. And what's fascinating in the story is not that Abram eventually has children late in life. What's fascinating in terms of the means of the blessing is that when Abram finally has children, he is a horrible father. I mean, worst father in the Bible. And it's interesting, this is his greatest blessing comes through his greatest weakness. And Abram's that type of person, you may know somebody like this, who is pretty much great at whatever he does. He interacts with a variety of people, he has great success, he is amazingly adept at a number of things, except for some reason, being a father. And I should say, he's not that type of person either who he's great at things and he drives you nuts. That is Joseph, who we'll hear about next week. But he is a terrible father, and what I mean by this is, for starters, he banishes most of his kids. So this starts with Lot, who we heard about today. Lot was his nephew. His brother has died, and he's looking out for him. And he could have adopted him, but he never does. And they go into Canaan together, and Lot is the one who will receive Abram's inheritance. But as soon as Lot and his workers start taking a little bit of interest in Abram's land, Abram very politely pulls him aside and says, hey, Lot, why don't you pick a direction, and you go that way, and I'll go this way. And he doesn't get his inheritance. And sadly, they do not speak in the rest of the Genesis account. Yes, Abram looks out for him from a distance, but that's the last they speak in this account. And then later, Abram has a son named Ishmael. And Ishmael's mother is Hagar, who was Sarah's servant. And it's tempting to think of Ishmael as illegitimate, but he was fully legitimate. Hagar was given as a wife, that is the word used, given by Sarah, fully with her knowledge, explicitly, so they could have kids. And they do, and Ishmael's born, and Abram loves Ishmael. It's very clear. And then a surprise happens, though it's not a surprise in the text, because Isaac is born to Sarah late in life. And at this point, Abram then drives both Ishmael and Hagar away, takes them both, puts them on one donkey, gives them one flask of water, one piece of bread, and sends them into the wilderness. And yes, in the Genesis account, Sarah gets the blame, and the story of Sarah is a fascinating one, which I'd like to go into more, but we don't have time. And yes, God reassures Abram that Ishmael will turn out okay, sort of, but it is Abram who drives his son away. And then he does this later in life 6 more times. After Sarah dies, he remarries, he has 6 children, and all of them, as soon as they get old enough to threaten Isaac's inheritance, he sends away. And this time, at least he gives them gifts, but they do not get the inheritance, and he doesn't talk to them again either in the rest of the account. So that is 8 of 9 kids banished, never to speak to again. And the 9th one, the favored one, this is Isaac, he tries to kill. And I know there are a lot of different takes on that story, and as someone who studied philosophy, Soren Kierkegaard would not like what I just said. And you'll probably point out that he doesn't, in fact, kill Isaac. But I'm going to say that's great, but he tries to kill his child. And we don't know exactly in this story how Isaac perceives this. At least the Genesis account doesn't talk about that. But a lot of commentators have, and a lot of ancient commentators even suggest that Isaac was permanently scarred by that moment. And what we do know for sure is that Isaac, like all of Abram's other children, at least in the Genesis account, does not talk to him again after that moment. So that's 8 out of 9 kids he's banished. The 9th one, he has a knife to his throat, and none of them does he talk to again. Yet God is saying that it is as a father that he will be a blessing. And perhaps this is why Abram's name gets changed, because Abram means something like the exalted father, and Abraham means something like father of a multitude. It's kind of a recognition that you might not be a great parent, but you are prolific, right? So there's at least quantity over quality. That is the second way that this passage is revolutionary in terms of how it portrays the divine. The third way that this is absolutely revolutionary is that Abram goes into the land and he finds that Yahweh is there too. It's not a God who's stuck in one place or met only in one way. And I gotta say, a lot of religiosity is about this, trying to meet God in the same way. And I'm not talking about spiritual practices. I'm talking about trying to recreate a moment, a particular encounter with God. So you might have expected Abram to go into Canaan, to have this experience, and try to come back to the place where he met Yahweh, and then have a retelling of what happened there. But that doesn't happen. Abram goes into Canaan, and he meets Yahweh in the journey, someplace new, in this brand new way. And we all have chapters in life like this. New moments, sometimes they're full of excitement and they're enjoyable. Sometimes they start from a sense of loss. Sometimes they're full of discomfort. But it doesn't really matter, because what matters is the moment in that new chapter, that moment in the journey when you encounter the divine unexpectedly. And for me, the most profound example of this happened in October of 1998. I was an exchange student in Kenya, and it was an amazing experience. But from the moment I got there, my roommate told me he wanted to take me out to his home village. And he was from a Pokomo village, which is along the banks of the River Tana. That's Kenya's longest river, and it's not far where it enters the Indian Ocean. So here we were, 2 months into my time there, and we had a semester break, and I decided it was a good time to go with them. So we went on this, what was an adventure, and the bus ride from Nairobi down to Mombasa, the overnight bus ride, is adventure enough. And then going up the coast from there got more exciting yet. In fact, at one point we had to get on a bus that every travel guidebook in the world at the time screamed, "Do not get on this bus, you will be robbed at gunpoint." But we weren't robbed at gunpoint, so take that, Lonely Planet. We got to the nearest town, and Japhet informed me that we'd be going the last 5 kilometers by bicycle. And I thought that sounded pretty cool. But then he told me he was going to stay in that town and visit a few people and send me on ahead. And then I realized there was no road from this town to his village. We were going through the bush. And then I realized that I wouldn't actually be pedaling the bicycle. I'd be riding on the back, and the kid who was doing the pedaling weighed about 95 pounds. But Japhet told me to go, and so I went. We got to his village, and he took me to Japhet's house. And his mother came to the door, and she looked rather surprised to see this kind of awkwardly smiling Wazungu standing there. And she seemed more surprised when the kid told her that I would be staying there and Japhet was coming. She quite literally didn't receive the telegram telling her that that was going to be happening. But anyway, she invited me in, sat down, and she ran to the back of the house where I heard the unmistakable sound of a chicken breathing its last. And we talked as best we could across languages, and then eventually my roommate showed up, and then we ate chicken, and then we went out and saw his village, and it was exactly like you'd expect me to describe it. It was earthen houses, thatched roofs, there were kids swimming in the river, there was literally a circle of village elders sitting around talking about life, and even the one store in town, in village with no electricity, it still had this shelf full of Coca-Cola on it. So everything you expected was there. And then we went and played volleyball with a few of his friends, which was a lot of fun. Played for a couple of hours. We played with an old soccer ball that was quite heavy and kind of hurt, but it was a lot of fun. And then I went to take a shower. And by shower, this is just an outdoor structure that was basically big enough to serve as both a latrine and a shower. There were just 2 holes in the ground. And I took a shower from a bucket, which is a pretty common thing. And the sun was setting. And all of a sudden, in that moment, I had the clearest sense of the unity of the divine that I've ever had. And as far as mystical experiences go, it's probably not that profound. It only lasted a few minutes. I didn't see anything that I can't explain or hear any unexpected voices. But I do remember instantly recognizing that it was the most spiritual moment of my life. There was this absolute unity to everything. It was as if the water that I was pouring over my body was connected to the water that was in the cells in my body, that was connected to the water in the nearby river, that was connected to the water on the distant cloud that was being lit up by the sunset. Everything was connected. All the people in my life, whether I just met them that day, or I'd known them for a couple months, or the people I knew from half a world away for my whole life, were all somehow connected. And that moment and all moments seemed somehow to merge. All the moments of my life felt present at that specific one. To quote from the music we'll sing later today and then we'll hear later today, there is this total sense of a God who is unseen yet ever near. A feeling of unceasing love that was found even in the very air that I was breathing. There was this unity to the divine and to everything that was simply beautiful. Now, in no way could that count as a proof for the existence of God. And that moment would not take away the pain that I would feel in some of the tougher moments of my life, and it wouldn't take away the pain that I would cause others in some of the worst moments of my life. But here I was, half a world away from home, having traveled to a place in a brand new chapter, and I found something that was absolutely familiar and remarkably new. And this is what Abram experiences. He follows Yahweh's call, and he found the revolutionary unity in the divine in this totally new place and in a new way. He found a unity of the divine so that even his greatest weakness could be redeemed. That is, as a father. And one of the most moving stories is after Abram dies, his 2 sons, Isaac and Ishmael, come back together as brothers to bury him. And Abram found a unity of the divine when he found that others too in Canaan were capable of participating in that same divine. Faith is about following a call that leads us to a place where the very air we breathe, where the water we use, where the relationships we have are full of blessing. And Abram was not a perfect figure of faith. In fact, at times he was far from it. But he is the one who has brought us to this place. And we are heirs of that faith. And as his heirs, we can ask the same question that he asked after his father had died. And that is, where are we called to go from here, and what new understanding of the divine will we find there?